what R.J. Rushdoony said about positive law. He said that if the law is unlimited, the state is unlimited, and that the business of the state becomes to control all men. And that's why it leads to tyranny. Negative law, on the other hand, is law here in the Oval, is that these are the things you're not allowed to do. And everything outside that, you're at liberty to go into infinity. The Ten Commandments are negative law. Even the ones that are put together in a positive light are negative. It kind of gives you boundaries of what you're not allowed to do. So that's why negative law is so important. It's important to understand the difference between the two. So what is the supreme law of the land in the United States? The supreme law of the land? The Constitution, that's right. Article 6, paragraph 2 says that it shall be the supreme law of the land. So that's why the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, because it says so. What is the social law on which the Constitution is based? Anybody got an answer for that one?
Scripture, God's law.
That's right, God's law, common law. And here's why, and I'll run through this logic to how it works. This is from the Constitution, it's Article 7. It dates itself from the year of our Lord, and also from the Declaration of Independence. So the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are linked. And you need to think of them as the Declaration of Independence is a charter that established our nation. The Constitution are the bylaws of how our nation is going to run. So when people say there's nothing about God in our Constitution, they're wrong. It's right here, the year of the Lord, and also into the Declaration of Independence. So you go back to the Declaration of Independence, and you find in the open paragraphs that it talks about the laws of nature, nature's God, that all men are created equal and endowed by certain rights by their Creator. So you go back up here, what is this law of nature? Where did that come from? It's very important that we understand laws of nature. And it came from Sir William Blackstone. Sir William Blackstone was a lawyer in England who wrote the commentaries on the laws of England in 1765-69. And every lawyer in America studied his books to become a lawyer up until the 1870s. So when our founders put that law of nature in there, this is what the definition of the laws of nature that they understood it to be. And Blackstone says that they were dictated by God himself and binding over all the globe. And that no human laws are of any validity if contrary to this, and all laws that are valid derive its authority from this. Immediately and immediately means first cause and second cause. God directly or indirectly has ordained this. So Blackstone not only said that in his commentaries, he said this as well. He talked about the higher law principle, meaning that because the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, it's not the highest law of the land. God's law is the highest law of the land, and it's based on common law, which is common law, because God planted those laws in the hearts of men. So you'll see these principles, and I'll go through what he outlines some of the stuff that he said in his commentaries. His law is an indiscriminate rule of action by a superior being. The natural law is unwritten law, or God's will is written on the hearts of men. That revealed law is revealed in the Bible, and it's superior to the natural law. So what he's revealed in the Bible supersedes the natural law. That no human can contradict nature or revealed law. Natural or revealed law. If a law contradicts, the law only has color of law, but it's null and void. In other words, if our legislators can pass laws that contradict God's word, but it's only the color law, it will not stand. And it will not. But where did Blackstone get this idea? Where did he get it from? Liber ex lege Moisi, which is Latin for liberty according to the laws of Moses, found its way to England's shores prior, just after the death of Christ, 33 AD, or thereabouts. And it Christianized the Celtic culture that was in England, so that they became a bottom-up society, that they elected their officials, their rulers, and these people ruled by the consent of the governor. And they lived that way until the Anglo-Saxons, the Jews came along in 450 and conquered them. But the culture of the Celts overcame the Anglo-Saxons and Jews, and the Anglo-Saxons and Jews adopted that bottom-up type of society. And they lived that way. Alfred the Great, who came to rule in 871, he codified the Liber ex lege into the foundation of British law. And that's why Blackstone referred back to it. He linked every law in England back to one of the 10 fundamental laws of God and the 595 statute laws of the Old Testament. So that's where he got it, and it stayed that way up until 1066, when the Normans came in and tried to institute a top-down society. When you hear about the Robin Hood tales, it wasn't he was robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. What he back to the Saxons who had landed and stolen from it. So that was that whole cultural battle that went on underneath everything else. But providentially, the Crusades happened around 1099 and distracted the Normans from making their claims and everything complete here in England, so that the culture, the bottom-up culture, was able to survive. You go to 1215 there at Runnymede, the Magna Carta. The barons reestablished some of those rights they had lost in 1066. And then going on to 1517, when Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the wall, to the church wall, Castle Church, he kicked off the Reformation, which had far-ranging consequences and chain of events I'll cover a little bit more later. Any questions on that timeline? So the Declaration of Independence. Well, and I'll show you where we have this stuff that it came in, that they influenced Blackstone into the Declaration of Independence. That nature of law of rights, that foundational laws, law of nature and the law of God. Truths are self-evident. Everybody can understand these. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand these truths. Rights are inalienable. They're given by God to the people, and that's where they come from. They can't be taken away by anybody. Oh, let me go backwards. They talked about, among them, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness, when they said that phrase was meant for property. If you read the constitutional debates for the Constitutional Convention, many times they say there that one of the primary reasons for establishing a nation was protection of property rights. Not only physical property rights, but intellectual property rights. So when you hear this pursuit of happiness, they're talking about property. If you look at the Virginia Bill of Rights, it says so outwardly. Nature of government is by consent of the government. We have a lawful right to resist under lawful authority. We have petitioning grievances of the government, and that's exactly what our founders did from 1665 until 1775. They kept petitioning King George III, saying, "Hey, this is not right. This is not right," and trying to address it in an appropriate way under a lawful authority. That's right. Stand back and a bunch of other acts that happened that were against the charters that had been granted to the colonists. Finally, in 1775, King George III cast off America and said, "You're no longer part of our government." And then we appealed by oath to God. God is the highest court. And at the end of the Declaration of Independence, they pledged their life and their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Because if it's not worked, they certainly would have been tried and executed. So who was the first president of the United States? Just throw an easy one in here. Say George Washington?
No.
It's good. George Washington was the first president of the United States under our current Constitution, but you're right, there was other presidents. There was 12 other presidents. Yeah. And Peyton Randolph was the first. Why was John Hancock's signature the most prominent at the bottom of the Declaration of Independence?
So the king wanted to make sure that the king saw his name.
Yes, that's true. And why was he the first one to sign?
I don't know.
Because he was the second president of the Continental Congress, and he was presiding over the Continental Congress when they signed the Declaration of Independence. There were 12 presidents prior to George Washington taking office. Like I said, King George III cast off America as a government, and so our colonists put together a government called the Continental Congress to govern themselves. That's why that happened. The Declaration of Independence was signed the following year. In 1781, we had the Battle of Yorktown, which ceased the hostilities between England. And it wasn't until 1783 the Treaty of Paris was signed that ended the war officially. But through all this time, we were governed by the Articles of Confederation, which wasn't working out so well. And commerce was the big place that it broke down. And they had, George Washington sponsored a brokered deal between Virginia and Maryland to have trade negotiations. Well, Madison thought that was a great idea and tried to get another one to happen, and that's what the Annapolis Convention was. Unfortunately, only 5 states had representatives that attended. These were New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Virginia. So Madison said, well, how about if next year we get together and we have more people, more participation? And that's how the Constitutional Convention came about. They had a Constitutional Convention, and then they sent it to the states for ratification. So what was our founders' political spectrum? Our political spectrum today goes from conservative to liberal. But what did our founders look at? Does anybody know? We got some ringers in here. Do you have an answer for that one? Went from anarchy On the right, tyranny on the left. That 5,000 year leap, absolutely. And the reason for that is because this is the truth. If you have too much liberty, you're going to have anarchy. If you have too much control, you're going to have tyranny. And we needed to put it in the center. The Articles of Confederation tended to the right, towards anarchy. And things were breaking down in our society, and that's why we had the Constitutional Convention to correct those things. And our founders wanted to put the Constitution dead in the center. Today, if you look at our modern spectrum, it fits between here and here. Now, you're going to have conservatives that fill this line all the way to the middle, and liberals that fill this line somewhere here that grays. But the thing that you must understand is that I don't know any conservatives that want to take away powers that are granted to our government and our Constitution. So there's really nobody that's gone this way. They're firmly rooted here. The most extreme right is rooted there. And that's where we need to be, in the middle of this big political spectrum here. So those who say they're centrists are actually compromising with tyranny. And that's why we should not have any compromise with those principles. We need to go back to our Constitution. We all need to live under it as the supreme law of the land. So, because it was a compromise that our founders gave us, and we need to do so by its original intent. Because if you take a document that our founders who applied specific meanings to every word and clause in it, and then generations later apply different meanings to those words and clauses, you are circumventing the constitutionally mandated amendment process, which is unconstitutional and illegal. And you're doing that to the benefit of one group and the detriment of another. And then that's wrong. It should not be happening. Any questions? So these are the issues with the Articles of Confederation. There was no strong executive. They had a president, but he had very limited powers, just about none, to be quite honest. They had no independent judiciary because it was a legislative supremacy. They had no power to unite the people around any cause or anything. They had no rules of commerce. Could not make it. Even the states still had that right. They had no foreign commerce standards. And they had no power to tax, which was a big issue. So the symptoms of anarchy that resulted from this is that at a personal level, everybody was enjoying what was right in their own eyes. And that led to anarchy. In the communities, you had mutinies, riots, rebellion. You had the Trent Mutiny, which were the Continental soldiers who had not been paid for their service during the war and mutiny to try to get the pay. And the reason they couldn't pay them was because they were begging the states to pay their bills, and the states, by and large, were not paying their bills because they had no power to tax. Shays' Rebellion. Shay was rebelling against the New York laws that favored the urban centers and not the rural centers. Shay was brought to justice and executed. So raw freedom just kind of tended towards anarchy in this respect. Economically, what we had was the continental currency system. And if you've heard the phrase, it's not worth the continental, it came from this because they expanded their money supply 15 times its original value. And it created a disaster in our economy. Didn't learn it lesson. No, it took quite a few years. But this is why our founders were quite clear about that they have the power to coin money and not to print it. And also that the states were willing to accept silver and gold as a medium of exchange. And in the state, you had trade wars among the states, which was the big reason why the National Convention came about and eventually the Constitutional Convention. So the states were not cooperating. They were putting tariffs on exports and imports, and all kinds of stuff was happening that was restricting trade and inhibiting our. Could you help the guy with that? From where did our founders obtain the wisdom to create such a long-lasting government? Bible, you say? Absolutely. Absolutely. But not just the Bible in itself. It was the fruit of the Reformation because there were 7 psychological changes that happened during the Reformation that led to the founding of America as we know it today as far as what our founders gave us. And these will seem obvious to you, but back then they were revolutionary. We exchanged the infallibility of the Pope for the infallibility of Scripture. Everybody could understand the Bible and have a relationship with God. We didn't need an intermediary here on earth to do so. We exchanged the sovereignty of the king for the sovereignty of God. The flow of power from God, the state, to the people, to God, people, the state, which is significant. You saw that in the Declaration of Independence. The inequality of class hierarchy for the equality of all under the laws of God. Centralization for self-government